Hi, welcome to the session on SAP Workflow Builder. And in this session, we are going to understand what are the different tools that are involved in the development process of building workflows within SAP system. And then we'll look at the Workflow Builder, how does it look like, the look and feel. And then we are going to talk about what are the different sections, getting acquainted with the screens, what are the different sections that we have within the Workflow Builder, and what are the different possible navigations where we can navigate from Workflow Builder. Once you navigate to Workflow Builder, what are all the other possibilities to navigate, and we'll also look at the different features of Workflow Builder. And finally, in the next session, in the following session, we'll look at from the system level, understand all these concepts, but theoretically to introduce you what a Workflow Builder is and how it will look like. So let's go ahead and get started. So in order to start with what a workflow is and how we develop workflows, before that it's obviously makes sense that how we can understand or how do we build within the SAP system, what are the tools that we have. So the first thing is that you have to understand what a Workflow Builder is in order to start your workflow development, or defining a business process within workflow. Or in fact, if I have to talk more precisely, whenever we make sure or whenever we try to redefine a business process, something which is existing within the organizational unit or any organization or any company, so what we are trying to do is like we are trying to automate the whole business process instead of involving some kind of manual activities. So there can be different kinds of manual activities that can be involved in the business process. So obviously the one important factor or one important thing that tool that we are supposed to understand is that what a Workflow Builder is. So basically we use Workflow Builder to create, maintain, and the whole CRUD operations, like creating, reading, updating, and deleting your workflows. Everything can be done from your Workflow Builder. And the transaction to execute your Workflow Builder is to execute your SWDG transaction. And in fact, it is not just about creating workflows or maintaining workflows. In fact, we have several other features that can help us to leverage the existing business process when we try to redefine any business process in workflows. So obviously one of the features is that you can also test directly without any kind of creating or without events, or without any sort of data, production data, or any sort of data. If at all you have a data that can be used for unit testing, so you can just go ahead and make use of this testing feature, whatever that is available within your Workflow Builder. So as I said, my Workflow Builder itself is a place where we actually develop the whole workflows. But before we look at and understand what the different sections of Workflow Builder, one more time I would like to give you precisely what a Workflow Builder is from technical point. What a workflow is from technical point of view. If I have to define a workflow, workflow is a definition which is always contained or constituted, or it can be also treated as a multi-step task. As I said in the introduction or the demo session, that we the frequently used terms, like we come across many terms like single step, multi-step task. So whenever you come across a term called multi-step, so something it is relevant to your something that they are trying to the context would be something they are trying to talk about workflows or workflow templates, whatever that you define and build within your Workflow Builder. So don't get confused. So multi-step task or workflow template, both are one and the same. And that is why a multi-step task, basically the way in which we just try to identify within the organizational structure is by using the object type WS. Whereas when we talk about workflow task, it will be identified as W. So there are different object types that are involved in the development process of workflow. But however, to just give you from technical point of view, what is the difference between a multi-step task and a workflow template, or from functional point of view, even a multi-step task and workflow template are both and one and the same. So they doesn't differ. It's only about a representation of the workflow template within the organization structure or hierarchy. So that is the reason why we say it as multi-step task from the context of organizational structure or from functional point of view. And whereas if I have to talk from technical perspective or technical context, I would say it as workflow template or workflow. So now, what is this workflow is all about? This workflow is nothing but a collection of different steps, single step. In fact, I have to say it is a collection of different steps. So that is what we are trying to do. Basically, why we try to develop the workflows is we are just trying to redefine the existing business processes of any organization into the workflows, so that the different factors that are involved in increasing the performance of time, or cost, whatever. There are so many attributes that are considered whenever we are trying to redefine any business process in the workflow. Obviously, one of the thing is that the time factor is considered as one of the crucial thing, and the monitoring factor, as I've already discussed all these things, but still to just refresh. So that is the reason why I just try to come up with the same points again and again. So yeah, a workflow definition is made up of individual steps, and a collection of all these steps are grouped together and as a whole one single unit. Logically, when these single steps or different steps are logically grouped together, based on the business process. As I gave you the example in the previous session, that if at all if I have to consider about booking a cab, so obviously the first thing is that submitting the form. That would be one step, and next step is identifying the respective unit or the department. That would be my second step, and I am validating the data whatever that I have submitted, the customer submitted while requesting for the cab. That is one more step. So in this way there are different steps. So obviously all these steps has to be placed, and logically they should be placed in such a way, or the execution of these steps has to be sequentially arranged in such a way that it just tries to replicate the same business process whatever that was earlier, or which is defined in the legacy process. So obviously workflow definition is a collection of different steps, and again because we are dealing with the business processes, so obviously when we talk about business process, again we are dealing with business objects. So every business object within the SAP system have different events. Events are nothing but the changes that can occur, or that might occur, or that had occurred with the objects data. It can be maybe changing, or it can be deleting, or it can be modifying. To just give you an example, or in case if you are just trying to raise an invoice, that is also creation of invoice or modifying invoice. So there can be n number of events with respect to a specific business object type. So workflow is also associated not only with the steps, but it is also associated and mapped with different events, so that whenever this event occurs within the SAP system, whatever the events of a specific business object type are associated with the workflow, so this workflow acts as a receiver. So it handles the event, so whatever the appropriate actions that has to be taken accordingly, the workflow has to take care, and that is what we define within the workflow. So on a whole, if I have to say that a workflow is just a simple collection of different steps, and it's a collection it's a collection of different events that are associated with the workflow, and all these steps and whatever the steps that we just created are grouped together either sequentially, or they can be also parallelly also. So this is how it looks like. The look and feel of the workflow builder is something like this. The transaction to execute and navigate to your to workflow builder in the system is your SWDD transaction, as you can see on the screen. And there are different sections within this screen, on the initial screen of your workflow builder, and as you can see that I just tried to highlight each and every section part of the the screen, and in fact I have tried to highlight some of the parts, some of the areas where I said like some of the basic features that we can get or available within the workflow builder are just highlighted in the green color. So the first area is like your information area, where you will be able to see your metadata about your workflow template, like the ID, what version you are running. Anyways, when we talk about versions, when we really build workflows from scratch, then I would like to give more insight on what a version is and how do we generate versions, and in which way we can manage the versions. Version management is discussed separately when we talk about building workflows. But for time being, you just understand there is also a possibility to maintain versions, the way in which we just try to maintain active and inactive versions with the ABAP reports, or even with, if I talk about organizational structure, even we have different versions. So in that way you can even manage your versions for the workflows also. So in the information area, most of the times you will be able to identify the workflow metadata information, like what is the ID and what version it is running and what is the active plan version it is using, and that is what you get information about within your information area. And if I talk about navigation area, as the way in which you just start and go ahead developing your workflows, as the way in which you start appending the steps into your workflow template, the navigation area starts getting modified. So for the first time, if you just try to see as a new workflow template, so the look and feel of your navigation area appears something similar to like this. But whereas as soon as you start appending the steps or including the steps within the workflow, so the steps gets the navigation area also gets modified, and it just tries to generate the node numbers. So as you can see that the ID for 502 and undefined is for 502 is nothing but your node ID. So these node IDs are again used by your backend system for the workflow system. The reason is that it can be whenever you just try include steps within the workflow template, so the workflow runtime environment has to understand what is the next step. And if in case you just try to include some conditions, again within the conditions you can have different branches. Based on the condition, again you can have different outcomes. So in that case, based on if condition is validated, so to which outcome it has to navigate, the execution runtime, or if it is false on the other side, it has to go to the other branch or the outcome. So all these things are defined or identified by the workflow system based on the node IDs. So that is the reason why nodes play a very important from the backend or from the workflow system point of view. So that is information that you can get. And in fact from the navigation area, if the workflow template whatever that you have built by using your workflow builder, so if it is very complex and it has so many steps involved, so many steps, if there are, let's say, assume that it's very complex workflow and you have around some, let's say, 20 steps within the workflow, and you want to identify one of the steps or focus to one of the steps within that 20 steps, single steps. So in that case, you can make use of this navigation area to just focus on a specific step also. And next to that, you can see that what are the different step types that you can use or insert. In fact, I would say that this is not the only option that you will be able to see on the third section. Under your navigation area, you have multiple options, like you can access your workflow wizards. Anyways, we are going to see in the further slides, in the coming slides. But if at all you wanted to understand what are the different steps that you want to insert or make use within the workflow builder or workflow template, so you can just navigate to the option or the area called step types that can be inserted, and as a result of the execution, you will be able to see the list of steps that can be used or build that can be used within your workflow template. So that is your third section area. So in fact, you have so many other options. We'll look at them in detail from the system level. And at the bottom you will be able to see the message area, which is nothing but your once you try to build and define your workflow template, you can even check for the consistency. So how do you check for the consistency? Obviously, you have a check icon or the operation that is available on the application toolbar, which is highlighted in the green color. So you can make use of this check consistency operation or activity, and you can get a validation result. like whether the workflow whatever that was defined against a business process is validated and consistent without any errors. And in fact, when you just try to check for the consistency, even it will look for in detailed step-by-step process between the bindings and everything, so you don't have to worry about it. So what actually you mean is by checking is that if I talk about from the ABAP perspective, or maybe from some report programming, basically what happens is whenever you just try to check for the consistency, it will just try to check the whole piece of information, like what are the different objects that are declared in the data declaration part. And if in case there are any syntactical errors, like you just try to forget your period at the end of the statement, or if there is any syntax error while defining or calling a statement or making use of in one of the editions of any statements, so it will just try to highlight you. In the same way, even whenever you just try to execute the check operation on a workflow template, what it will try to do is, like, it will try to check your binding definitions, what the different container elements and associate compatibilities, all these things. Anyways, we are going to look at all these things in the coming sessions, but to just give you a glimpse, so this is what happens when you just try to check for the consistency of your workflow template. And at the same time, if there are any errors, so obviously the list of errors are displayed in your message area, and in fact in the result of syntax check you can see that again you will be able to see the list of messages. So the main area where we are going to work most of the times is that your design area or the graphical model section, where you can just start including the steps or appending the steps to the existing workflow. This is the place where we start designing the workflow. So if I have to say that for the first time, if I just click on the create icon on the application toolbar, so your workflow template looks something like this. So it will have one undefined block in the sense it basically helps you to insert or replace that step with one of the existing or the standard steps that are available that can be used within the workflow. Whatever the steps that you see under your step type list, steps that can be inserted, so you can insert one of the steps by choosing one of the steps from the list. Okay, so this is the place where we most of the times work when we start really working for workflows. Okay, and the other area is your overview area. So this is the place where you just get the whole glimpse of your whole workflow upon completion of your workflow, so you can get just make use of it to get the overview of the whole workflow process. It is not just about so the main difference between your design area and overview is that design area basically you can just focus on one specific step, but whereas when you just look at the overview, irrespective of whether you just try to focus on one step in the design area, at any point of time you will get the whole overview of the workflow design. The way in which you just try to define, you define the template or you define the workflow. So at any point of time, irrespective of whether you just try to focus on one specific step or you're just looking at the whole workflow, irrespective of what kind of situation you are at any point of time, the overview section will provide you the whole design look and feel of your workflow. Okay, so this is how your workflow builder looks like. As I said, the important transaction to navigate to your workflow builder is SWDD, and in fact you have different other ways of navigating to workflow builder. Just stay tuned to the other sessions. Maybe you will just able to identify the other transactions or the way in which or just try to follow the next session. In that also I just try to highlight. And yeah, so what are the different steps? As I said, I'm just trying to continue the same section. So these are the different steps that can be included at any point of time, whatever the workflow template you are trying to develop. So these are the different steps that you can make use within the workflow development process. So the first important unit or the basic unit of developing a workflow is what kind of step that you are trying to include or make use within your workflow template or workflow building process. So you can see that there are activity, web activity. Activity is basically, is as I said, like if I have to submit a form, so submission of my form is something like I have to gather, collect the whole information, whatever that was included or entered or inserted in the web application, and once I get this whole data into the backend, I have to just transfer this data to one of the business objects. So this can be one single activity, gathering the information and sending it to the respective business object type, or creating an instance of a business object. So that is nothing but creating one step. So how do I create steps and make use of these single steps in my workflow? Is by making use of activity step type. In this way, you have different steps. As the sessions goes on, you will be able to understand all these steps, each and every step in detail. So what are the different attributes that are associated with all the steps? We are going to understand even how we can make use of these steps in different ways. There are some steps that can be enhanced, and and they can be used even dynamically also. So we'll look at all these things in the next coming sessions. And the next session is very important, is that about understanding container is, what a container is. So as I said, under navigation area, you have not only just, it is not just about looking the list of steps, but as you can see that in the previous slide, as I said that it's about the option whatever that you choose, based on that this specific section or the area tries to change its appearance. So if you just choose one of the options as workflow container, other than step types that can be inserted, so when you choose workflow container, so it appears something like this. Now the next question is, what is a container? So most of the times you come across this term called container, workflow container, and workflow elements, element ID. So what is this all about? If you have to just correlate and compare, basically when you compare it with ABAP reporting or ABAP programming, basically what you do is, like when you start developing a report, you start trying to declare all the data objects in the initial of the at the initial stage of the report development process, right? So in the same way, even when you start developing the workflows within the workflow builder, a workflow also has to hold some values, data runtime data objects. So it should also be able to manipulate the different data objects that are involved with or associated with the business object type. So that is the whole and sole purpose of workflow. So we are dealing with some business objects. So obviously every business object is again associated with different properties and attributes. So how do you make sure that at the runtime, how do you hold these values? So that is nothing but your container. A container is nothing but a bucket where you start, or it's a kind of place where you start declaring all the data objects. So but in workflow terminology, we call them as elements. We don't call them as data objects, but in fact we call them as elements. So that is the reason why if there are different containers available within the whole SAP workflow development process. For example, this is a workflow container. Okay, so in the workflow container, whatever the elements that you just start declare, you'll just hold. So all the data objects or all the elements, whatever that you define under workflow container, this whole container can be accessed by any of the steps that you include within your workflow or workflow template, right? So this container can be accessed by all the steps, irrespective of the number of steps whatever that you have included or appended in the workflow. All the steps will be able to access to this workflow container and its associated elements. So for the first time, if you just look at the workflow container, the look and feel will be something like this. The elements that are that are already existing, these are some of the standard elements by default, which will be created as soon as you start creating the workflow template. So ad hoc objects, attach objects, workflow initiator, workflow priority, workflow object ID, work item, workflow version, and predecessor work item. So there are different standard container elements, but at the same time you can also create your own container elements also. So how do you create a container elements? All you have to just double click to create the container element on the area whatever that was highlighted. So once you double click on it, the next section or the subscreen whatever that you're going to see is something like which is on the right side of your screen, the screen in which I just tried to highlight the sequence 1 and 2. So what is that you have to what is that you're supposed to do on creation process of an element is that you are supposed to provide an element ID and keep an eye on your element ID case. Obviously case sensitivity is also considered when you are trying to define or declare elements within your workflow container. So case sensitivity also matters, and then you just provide the name of the element ID and description of the element ID and associated reference. So the reference can be your object type, or it can be also refer to one of the classes, existing classes. It can refer to one of the data dictionary structures and its associated fields. And in case if you are not sure, like you can just directly use one of the data elements that are available in your ABAP dictionary. And that is what you just try to do under the data type tab, so data declaration tab. So what you're trying to do is that once you double click on it, a subscreen appears, and the subscreen you are just defining your element ID and its associated referencing type. And in the properties tab, basically what you have is like whether you want to import or export, or in case if you want to make it as a changing parameter, then in that case you have to enable both import and export. And in case if you have any default value, then you can just place it under initial value. And in the change data, you will be able to identify the administration information or the metadata, like when the data element was created by whom, at what time. So you can just get some system information from your change data tab. But the most important things that you have to understand is that about data type or declare referencing type and the properties. So that is what a container is. So this is your first container. As I said, you have different containers. So this would be your first container. How does it look like? So a workflow container is nothing but a place or an area or a section where you start creating your data objects alias elements. Get used to your workflow terminology. So we don't call them as data objects, we call them as elements. So container elements, we call them as container elements rather than data objects. Right, from the workflow terminology, we call them as workflow container elements. Right, so this is how your workflow container looks like. Now, as I said that the third section is more important, because once you just navigate to the third section of the workflow builder, where you have an option of choosing different areas. Like in the first slide, we just tried to see the step types that can be inserted, and in the previous slide we just saw what a workflow container is. But if you just click on the arrow that is highlighted on the screen, on the small arrow which is facing towards down, so if you just click on that arrow, so these are the list of options that will be available. So based on the area or the section, whatever that you choose, the look and feel of this particular area or the section changes. So if you just try to click on step types that can be inserted, so all the list of steps will be displayed. And if you just look at click on workflow container, then your workflow container is displayed. And if you just try to click on my workflows and tasks, so all the workflows that you are involved in the development process, or you just try to execute, all the list of workflows will be displayed. So wherever your user ID or your SAP user is involved, so all the workflows whatever in which you are involved, so all the workflow templates and tasks are displayed over here. And document templates is again a place where you can start creating your Word documents, Excel sheets. There are different document templates that you can associate with the workflow, and in fact you can make use of these document templates at runtime during the workflow execution process. So you can just send these documents as attachments to another users. But however, what you're just trying to do is like you're just trying to create a template, but obviously at the runtime the values whatever that you want to populate in these documents will be available only once you start your workflow execution. As I said, in fact, if you want to navigate to the different workflow wizards, again you're supposed to choose workflow wizards, team working, these all things are again discussed in the coming sessions, as this would be very early to make you understand all these things, but whatever that is important I just try to highlight over here. So the things that you have to understand is that whenever you just try to click on these arrows, in fact in the graphical model on the initial screen and the design area, on the top of design area, you will be able to see same kind of arrow at the corner, right corner. So if you just click on that right corner, you will be able to see tree modeling and graphical modeling, and in fact you can also export and import your workflow. So all these possibilities are possible. So I would request, or I would recommend, suggest you to just navigate your workflow builder for the first time, at least for some time, and get acquainted with your workflow building process. So that is what your workflow looks like. So once you start creating and appending the workflows, this is how it looks like. So this is your the end-to-end workflow. That is how it looks like. So the workflow, whatever that you are looking at, is currently a standard workflow, which is only triggered or started whenever you submit any leave application from your ESS portal, or sorry, ESS employee self-service portal, right? So this workflow basically from the portal it gets initiated or started. So but however, that is not the context or scope of discussion, but this is how actually your full workflow looks like. So as you can see that the first step and the second step. So what are the different steps that you can see? As I said, like step is nothing but a single step or a standard task. As I have already highlighted in the frequently used terms, standard task or a single step, both are one and the same. A workflow definition or a multi-step task, both are one and the same. So don't get confused with these terms. A multi-step task or a workflow or workflow template, all these are one and the same. And standard task, single step task are one and the same, right? So as you can see, there are different steps, and there are different branches or outcomes, and you can see that based on some step types, sometimes there are 3 branches based on the or outcomes based on the again some steps there is only one outcome. Outcome is nothing but a place this is what you call it as outcome, and you can see for this step it has 3 outcomes, right? So that is what a outcome is, or a branch. So it has 3 branches. It has for this step there are 3 branches coming out of this step, and there is one branch which is coming inside, and after execution of this step there are 3 possibilities of navigating the workflow execution process. So this is your single step, and this is your task, or this is your activity, or this is your step, single step. So all are one and the same. From the workflow context, if I have to talk about steps, then we call it as activity. If I have to talk from the organizational perspective, I call it as a standard task. Functional perspective, if I have to say what is a task is nothing but every job. For example, in every organization, every employee has a certain activities or tasks that he has to perform. So all these tasks, whatever that he's responsible for, are created as a single steps or standard tasks, and later what these do is that they try to associate or map these tasks to that specific job or employee. So whenever any activity whatever the activities that he's responsible for, if anything happens within the a business process, so if there is any task that he is responsible for, so in that case the responsible employee will handle the respective task or activity, right? So that is what your workflow looks like. What are the different possible navigations that are possible? I just tried to list down very few things over here, but apart from this there are many other possibilities. One is that you can just navigate to your data dictionary, which is nothing but SC11. Again, you can navigate to your business workplace, which is nothing but your SAP inbox, SBWP. The transaction is SBWP, SAP business workplace. And in fact, you can just go to your organizational maintenance screens. PPOCE is the transaction to create your organizational hierarchy or organizational structure. and in fact you can navigate to your transport organization from within the workflow builder, and you can also go to your workflow customizations. The transaction is SWU3. You can have diagnosis transactions SWU2, UD, and ST22, class builder SC24. These are just some of the transactions or navigations that I just tried to highlight. In fact, you have many other transactions where you can just navigate to your web services, proxy generation screens, and in fact you have possibility to navigate to your correlation screens. So there are many possibilities to navigate, but these are some of the important areas or the navigations that are frequently used from within the workflow builder. So as I said, there are different features of workflow builder, but at the runtime, in the following session, we'll be able to look at more features, because as I said, when we try to start giving you the introduction of the concept, obviously we thought of that, just try to highlight some of the main important features, and at the same time during the building or developing process of the workflows, it is more important to get acquainted with all the other features of the workflow builder. So for time being, you just make sure that these are some of the features that are available. So as I said, workflow definition maintenance is totally possible from your workflow builder, and in fact you can simulate and test your workflows, or you can just execute SWUS transaction. In fact, if you don't like to, or if you want to look at how you can independently check, not executing from the workflow builder, but if you want to execute manually some other workflow template, basically what you can just try to do is, like, you can execute SWUS transaction, and you can insert the workflow template over there, and you can start using executing the workflows. And one more important feature of the workflow builder is that you can import and export workflows. Whenever you just try to start import and export workflows, these the whole definition, whatever the template that you are just trying to download, it will be downloaded in the XML format. Okay, it is something we call it as BPML. This whole workflow definition will be downloaded along with the step IDs, workflow template IDs, and everything. But make sure, again, there are some constraints whenever we are just trying to download and upload the workflow templates to one system to another system, because there could be possibility like the deadline monitoring, and there are some places like, if you define some conditions, so these conditions won't be downloaded by default in the system. So obviously importing and exporting is not obviously a good idea of transporting the developments from one system to another system, but obviously the reliable and more consistent way of transporting your developments is by using a transport organizer. Version management is also possible. How do we manage different versions? Workflow dependent and workflow independent versions. You have two different types of versions. What is workflow dependent version, and what are the different attributes or properties that are associated with your version dependent or version independent, again differ from each other. And as I also said that you can generate different versions, and at any point of time make sure you have only one version as an active version. So whenever you try to start workflow, so the active version will be considered as your runtime object rather than the inactive versions, right? And we also have different business events associated with the workflows, and we can associate these events from within the workflow builder itself. So that is what I have for the workflow builder, and let's in the next session or in the following session you will be able to see more information about workflow builder, and from the system level. In fact, I'll try to make you go through all the fundamental concepts or fundamental features, and in fact I'll try to make sure that I just provide the whole information. Thank you very much.